Silksong's world is ruined. I was 20 hours into my first playthrough when I realized that what destroyed this kingdom was something entirely different from the force that consumed Hallownest in the first game. Because at the top of this world lies the Citadel, a place that haunts the land with silk and song. It is the corrupting force behind all the death and decay, with rulers whose fingers are slowly creeping across Pharloom's throat. But it's also a place that promises peace and divinity, attracting bugs from all over the world to start a religious pilgrimage, singing their way to the top while faith, supposedly, guides their way. And I kind of get it, because if everything around you is ruined, what hope is left to hold on to? So in this video, I'm going to continue the journey through Pharloom. After mapping the lower levels in the previous video, it's time to ascend the Citadel and reveal how they ruined Silksong's world to build their kingdom. The gates open to reveal the Citadel, a place of immense power with a golden civilization. This place is the final ascent of a pilgrim's journey, a place so majestic that it's difficult to look past its shining shell to see that it is internally flawed, corrupted, and slowly dying. The Grand Gate is the massive entrance to the Citadel itself, the ultimate barrier between the desperate world of the pilgrims and the power of the beings above. Stepping into the main hall of the Grand Gate, I could see silk covering the giant structures that turned out to be enormous scales of justice. I jumped and pushed my way to the top, forcibly tilting them with my weight and jumping just to climb higher. It's almost too on the nose to say the system of judgment is an unfair mechanical obstacle to filter the strong from the weak. I made it to the top, and while I was waiting for this broken elevator to take me higher, I had some time to reflect about the state of Pharloom, because the kingdom's state of decay seems to be defined by three major curses: the cultural, psychological, and religious destruction like the Scar's regression to the primal and the ritualistic violence of the burning bugs, the environmental and ecological destruction seen in Bilewater's toxic sump because of the Citadel's upper facilities. And I'd like to talk about the last curse, but this elevator seems to be stuck. It isn't immediately obvious that the place we just fell into could be considered the guts of the Citadel, a huge industrial environment where the heavy machinery that is necessary to run the world above is maintained and operated. My idealized vision of the holy rich Citadel died the second I got up from the crashed elevator. The very first thing I saw was that resting benches cost money and were only good for a single use. The only place that offers relief is monetized and a privilege to be earned, because in the Underworks, it's not actually a basic right to sit down and rest. Around these devices, I found several bugs dead from exhaustion after being unable to afford the bench. This area full of dangerous machinery like gears, cogs, steam vents, and lava is full of inhabitants that are largely pilgrims who failed to gain acceptance into the Citadel. They are relegated to this realm of perpetual labor with the promise that their work will eventually earn them a place above. And this was the deepest tragedy of exploring the underbelly, the fact that the enemies aren't really mindless beasts but the pilgrims themselves. They are all sick, exhausted, and eternally toiling. I saw undersweeps scrubbing the suit from vents and pipes with a cleaning implement as filthy as the rest of this place, because the workers are just layering grime on grime, with laborers like the underlofts grown sickly from the smog and maintaining the gears that are killing them, literally succumbing to the toxic environment created by the higher beings. Perhaps the most disturbing of these beings is the Underpoke, a worker consumed by the haunting that exemplifies that everyone is stuck working far beyond their mortal limits. The kingdom's curse is so complete that even death cannot grant relief from labor. I remember on Pharloom's path of the pilgrimage, the bugs I defeated would often drop a handful of rosaries, but here, when I eliminate one of these workers, they drop only a single bead or two. These laborers are so underpaid that the very idea of them affording one of the paid rest benches is an impossibility. They are the foundation upon which the Citadel's economy of exploitation is built. The workers attack me on sight, but I couldn't help but feel sorry when I saw them guard their hard-earned rosaries. That freight rosary string is probably their entire combined savings. And if somehow the paid benches don't get the point across, I found this hidden 25 rosary confession booth that certainly did. A pilgrim can pay a sum larger than the cost of resting to confess their sins, and the response isn't from a living priest or something, but a pre-recorded message that tells the confessor they must cleanse themselves through work. Dodging the moving machinery, sharp gears, and choking steam was exhausting me, but realizing these hazards are simply the normal working conditions for the failed pilgrims was soul-crushing. They toil in this death trap, constantly on the brink of collapse, while the system ensures they can't even afford one moment's rest. This overwhelming systemic cruelty is perfectly embodied by a hidden creature named Loam, a large bug running endlessly on a treadmill that seems to be powering the entire biome. He's not a slave in the traditional sense, but an indentured zealot convinced that the beings above are watching, and as long as he works hard enough, he will finally be rewarded with a place in the glorious Citadel. I tried to run on the small treadmill next to him, and after a few minutes of running, I was awarded with a single rosary. The perfect, cruel microcosm of this life's futile labor. I tried to return to Loam a little later and found him dead, crushed by debris. He wasn't rewarded for his faith, he was consumed by it to maintain the shining perfection above, finally free from his holy obligation. I felt a shiver as I entered a cold new biome that looked disturbingly like some kind of abandoned hospital. While song must be sung, none may falter. Infirmity, sickness, death, all are banished from our Citadel. This is the oath of the Whiteward, a cruel, haunted place where horrific experiments were performed. The first room I explored contained medical chairs with lifeless bodies still seated in them. I picked up a cylinder that was able to play the recording of a surgery performed in Whiteward's operating theater. This operation that sounds more like an analog horror was no doubt done by one of Whiteward's surgeons, the cruel physicians responsible for the horrific operations on the Citadel's bugs. These chairs and tools were all made for the sake of implanting silk into the inhabitants' bodies. The surgeons and those within the Whiteward found that silk is able to prolong one's life, a scientific breakthrough, a way to grant eternal life to all bugs. So the Citadel began to run experiments using the lower class as test subjects. It's clear it's no coincidence that this place was built right above the Underworks, a way to ensure the workers remain alive and functional for as long as possible. I found a mountain of husks in the basement of the Whiteward, all victims of silk experiments. But not all the shells are empty. Haunted beings like the Dreg husks are possessed by the silk and lash out with sharp pins caught inside their thread. And it gets so much worse. The Dreg wheel is a shell of a small bug that stretches its silk to form a crushing wheel. This living silk that commands a dead shell is an abomination of nature, something that's all too common across Pharloom. The final section of the Whiteward is the mortuary, where the morticians are responsible for the cremation of husks and the recycling of silk from their shells. The area itself is a simple, practical space, characterized by the presence of furnaces where the deceased are brought to be broken down. It seems this is the place where the carapaces with flint from the deep docks end up. The workers there were farming the material used for their own doom. This operation completely contradicts the public oath that sickness and death are all banished, because the dark reality is that it's only banished for the Citadel's elite. For the pilgrims, it's just a gateway to becoming a repurposed resource for places like the Underworks. A dead bug can't serve the Citadel, but through religious lies, forced labor, and the physical manipulation of silk within their bodies, they can be eternally loyal. Because of these procedures, silk has seeded so deep into the shells of the inhabitants of Pharloom that the air and water have become permeated with threats as well, making all bugs easy prey for the haunting. This is what started the cosmic disaster that caused the Citadel, including Whiteward, to slowly fall into ruin. Many of the victims were thrown into a locked pit. Their souls, so obsessed with silk, eventually morphed into a single entity. The Unraveled is the tormented will of countless husks made manifest in this pit of silk dregs. It is the complete pain of all those bugs, obsessed with and consumed by the very substance that killed them. Their pain shall forever remain here. Even I do not possess the strength enough to cleanse it. As horrifying as the existence of the Whiteward is, the Citadel does seem to recognize that regular bugs can't do everything. So beings called architects have been hard at work crafting automatons to do some of the more dangerous work. This is the Cogwork Core, the mechanized heart of the Citadel and a high-tech and dangerous region of industry and machinery. In more ways than one, this biome feels like a physical manifestation of the cold, unfeeling efficiency of the upper world, a place to store the necessary machines that can be used for labor and perhaps war efforts. Mapping out the core was a literal gauntlet of turning saws and gears, a deadly labyrinth that prioritizes the function of the machine over the life of a bug. Before I was fully able to enter the core, I encountered the Cogwork Dancers, a pair of twin automatons that guarded the entrance. They are elegant, deadly, and driven by a beautiful syncopated rhythm. As soon as I eliminated one of them, I felt like I had just made a terrible mistake. I can't be the only one that had to hold back tears when the remaining dancers struggled to cling to their sad existence without their partner. All of these automatons were created by the architects, whose core function is not only to design and maintain the inner workings of the Cogwork Core, but also the greater Citadel structure as a whole. I came across many of these constructs that are responsible for repairing and extending the core structure, like this Cogwork Cleanser, a steam-shooting unit built to keep the core free of infestation. The architects almost certainly used nature for inspiration, as the Cogwork Crawler, built in the shape of a scuttling bug, is explicitly based on bugs found outside of the Citadel. The crawler even has retractable pins on its back, intended to cut song cylinders free of any obstruction. One of these mechanisms reminded me of the workers in the deep docks. The Cogwork Hauler, like the Flintstone Flyer, carries around loads of dangerous flintstone. They are born and built only to work until time stiffens their limbs. Perhaps it is mercy. This construct knows nothing of the freedom it lacks. Deep in the core's lower levels, I entered a chamber that looked like an industrial graveyard. The creatures on the floor here looked like dead architects, so I wasn't sure how this place was even still running until I found the 12th architect, still at work and responsible for the continued production of the automatons. Even their walls were full of prototypes and incomplete blueprints for new designs. Next to them was a large room filled with towering automatons. These constructs seemed too large for simple maintenance and looked to be multi-purpose units built for heavy lifting and demolition, the kind of large-scale projects that could build and reshape the Citadel's foundations. To imagine one of these leviathans moving, its massive limbs and heavy machinery focused on me as an enemy, is to consider the true terror of what the automatons are capable of. Perhaps this other line of automatons, called the Sentinels, were protectors constructed for precisely this reason. I was able to find a cog-heart piece to revive one after the world fell into ruin, and for my effort, it immediately turned its blades on me, perhaps mistaking me for one of the Citadel's own haunted pilgrims. It's hard to blame her though. This being is simply protecting a dead kingdom, just like Hornet did in Hallownest, going as far as attacking an entity that she assumed might harm the kingdom, but the opposite was true in both scenarios. The core held one final ascent, a brutal platforming challenge with a vast chamber with towering pillars at the summit. Hitting these pillars in the right order creates a melody and... okay, yeah, I'm not great with music, so this took me a while, but when the sequence finally clicked, the metallic sounds of the core were replaced by something almost sacred. With the beautiful melody still humming in my head, the Citadel begins to breathe in this new biome. And I mean that literally, because what follows is a mechanical lung called the exhaust organ that exists adjacent to the Underworks. From afar, it looks like an enormous pipe organ below the Citadel's foundations, but in a place like this, so close to bile water, it couldn't possibly be a holy instrument. This place is a mechanical respiration unit, a waste treatment facility designed to handle the Citadel's most precious and toxic substance. Every miracle, as seen in the Whiteward, has a byproduct, and what the kingdom cannot use, it expels. The exhaust smog is funneled down through the organ's pipes as a massive filtration system, and all of it pours into the waters of bile water, polluting the biome and shaping an ecosystem entirely dependent on the Citadel's refuse. An ecology built on divine pollution, a world that sustains itself by poisoning the masses beneath. These vapors of the organ's constant expulsion gather in the upper reaches of the Citadel's depths, condensing into a new phenomenon known as the mist. At first, I thought it was fog covering this area, but it's the chemical residue of Pharloom's industry. The corridors here loop endlessly and rooms rearrange themselves as if the entire biome is caught in a hallucination. And all of this smog is gathering in the upper reaches of the caves in Sinner's Road. Taking a wrong turn means ending up at the entrance of the mist, a fate that has befallen every roach tender that tried to escape. The wraiths that drift within this area are anguished specters of lingering threat, not quite a bug, but a projection of another's will in smog and silk. They scream out and attack blindly, and because of their ephemeral nature, they can't be dispelled for long. At the heart of this all, inside the exhaust organ, lies Phantom, a mournful creature tasked alone to expel the Citadel's choking refuse. Phantom is a living being tethered to the machine, an unwilling servant to the city's toxic byproduct. Their movements are graceful, even beautiful in a sorrowful way, like a dancer in an industrial hellscape. The size of the exhaust organ demands a powerful force to manage the outflow, and it is Phantom who is condemned to this role. So when Hornet defeats Phantom, the organ finally falls silent. The machinery halts and the mist dissipates almost instantly. It's even more proof that the Citadel's light only shines because the world beneath it suffocates. And now, for the first time, the kingdom above isn't breathing. During one of my trips to uncover more of the kingdom, I found a passage that was previously inaccessible because of the mist. And that's where I found something I can't explain. I cut my way through the petrified vines when I found this being I just have no name for. I guess I'll take it with me for now. The social and class destruction was rumored to be equally disgusting in this other hidden area, but I couldn't find it anywhere. This guy over here called Grindel told me it was a prison or something, so I did the only logical thing and did a crime. This warden fly, responsible for capturing sinners like me, put me in a cage, transported me to the slab, and did something that wasn't part of my plan. He stole Hornet's cloak. My mission, or Zero mission was clear. I had to break out of the cell with my basic movement and weak kick attack, navigate the dangerous, spiky and cold environment of the slab, find the keys to unlock different parts of the prison, and kill every disgusting fly for what they have done to me. Everything went smoothly until I found a path that led me directly above a group of dirty old flies gathering around Hornet's cloak like this. I wish I didn't spend so much time on the internet, because this scene is disturbing in more ways than one. After making my way through the dark cells, the guard flies continued to block my path with their disgusting tactic of spitting out a glob of sticky saliva that I kept getting stuck in. Even as young flies, it seems these creatures dedicate their lives to the slab. The penitent and puny penitent are humbled prisoners serving their sentence for a sin committed within the Citadel. Do they realize they will never leave this place? Or do they even know how long they have stayed already? I guess it's not important. My only concern is getting my cloak back and hoping I can get the awful smell out. I finally emerged into a room above the flies. They put on the cloak and paraded around in it, but then this happened. With Hornet's cloak finally back, it's time to start the real exploration of the slab. This place is ostensibly a holy place of forgiveness, where sinners and heretics of the Citadel come to repent. However, it's clear the general atmosphere suggests its current state is that of a neglected, rundown prison. In one of the cells, an old penitent told me, "By the grace of the Citadel, I am here as a penitent. Here, I can hide from the shame of my sins until they are withered away by time. Leave this place? Please, strike me down dead before you speak such blasphemy again." There are portions of the slab that open directly to the ice-cold winds, exposing Hornet to a frost that chips away at her health. The cold makes it clear how far this place has fallen from warmth and life, because it's exactly these outdoor sections that show the slab is a decaying structure at the edge of the inhabitable world. It's a miserable life for the flies and penitents that are forced to exist here. Some of the most notable transgressions condemned here include indolence, where those who refuse to labor endlessly for the Citadel are cast down in punishment. Then there are the heretics, those who dare to speak doctrines beyond the Citadel's rigid faith. And finally, apostasy, the ultimate betrayal reserved for the highborn as leaders who turned against their sacred order, and in doing so, forfeited both status and salvation. This one chamber unsettled me more than any other. It held a cage bound in runes and etched with the mark of the Citadel. I lingered there for a while, torn between curiosity and dread, wondering what kind of horror would require such bindings. In the end, I couldn't bring myself to open it. Whatever was sealed inside was meant to stay forgotten, and I wasn't ready to face the horrors. At the top of the slab resides its matriarch, the Broodmother, the source from which every jailer is birthed and bound to servitude. Her den is cluttered with uniforms, as if the moment her offspring draws breath, they're drafted into labor. Everything about her, the location, her children, even the nature of their sins, it reflects a society locked in a self-perpetuating cycle of punishment, each generation inheriting the same cosmic debt as the last. Because in Pharloom, even death cannot stop a system built to forever recreate its own cruelty. I could see that when I returned to the Broodmother's den some time later after I defeated her, when another broodling had already taken her place. I had already felt hints of the cold seeping through the slab's outer walls, but stepping beyond it was something else entirely. Leaving behind the despair of the prison, I began the long ascent toward Mount Fae, a biome that replaces the choking heat and machinery of the Citadel's depths with a breathtaking desolation. Glacial peaks rise like monuments to neglect, and Pharloom's second great curse, the environmental and ecological collapse, reveals itself in full. This air is bitterly cold. Exposing myself to this climate for too long could literally freeze me to death. The mountain's defining trait is this frost that seeps into everything, a direct result of the Citadel's altitude at the top of the world and its indifference to natural balance. While this area was likely a natural formation in Pharloom existing long before the Citadel, there are passages and tuning forks built into the mountain to help bugs climb to the top. Rumor speaks of a deity waiting at the summit of Mount Fae, a winged being said to bestow either revelation or death upon those bold enough to call its name. As I made my ascent, the wind sharpened and the world below me grew thin, but I wasn't entirely alone. Drifting through the icy air were creatures known as driftlins, graceful gliders whose wide wings and heavy cowls let them float through the freezing currents. They guided me upward, almost deliberately, and I began to wonder if they were more than just wildlife, perhaps the offspring of the very god that crowns this mountain. I eventually ran into a being who was humming to himself while working in a secluded hut. This creature provides masks for the bugs of Pharloom, giving an identity to those who do not have it, and there's actually a way to take off his mask. He barely reacts when you hit him unless Hornet uses a charge strike, revealing his void-filled eyes and his voice becoming a lot deeper. Hallownest had a similar being that provides faces for the faceless of the kingdom. There's a deeper meaning here, but while I was lost in thought, I barely noticed I made it to the top and suddenly the deity descended. Before I could get a good look, it immediately upgraded my cloak with a way to resist the cold. So now, without having to worry about freezing to death, I could see I was in the presence of a majestic creature that must have ruled this mountain long before the Citadel's influence. And so I would have liked to spend more time in the presence of this ancient god, but it was time to move to the next biome. Luckily, the way down the mountain was much easier than the climb upwards. These harsh environments and the Citadel's indifference to them extends to the furthest corners of Pharloom, and that's exactly what brought me to the ancient sands of Karak, a great desert ecosystem located right below Mount Fae and near the blasted steppes. I could feel the sands below me were hiding infinite secrets, but the biggest one is the eerie-looking landscape of what seemed to once be a thriving coral forest, a place that turned into a fossilized seascape, a graveyard for a lost ocean. This entire region, as the name would suggest, was once the domain of the Order of the Karaks, ruled by a legend known as Crust King Khan. They were one of the ancient kingdoms that fiercely resisted the rise of the Citadel, and like so many others before them, they were broken entirely. But the defeat was both cultural and geological. The fighting, the power used, or perhaps simply the abandonment by the ruling powers above caused the region to collapse. The water vanished, the gorge dried up, and now only a small handful of creatures remain, like the coral firm, a dark-furred bug that protects itself with a spiked coral nut. They seem to be related to the creatures I found in Belhart that used the hard bells in that area as protection instead. It was back in the blasted steppes when I first came across the Driznit, small creatures that wear fragments of coral as masks, but here in this new biome, their larger kin are the dominant species. The Driznarga have evolved their masks into extensions of their faces, and it seems their aggression has no ill effect on their aim. Critters like the Poke Nabbin are patient ambushers that blend in with the terrain. Their wide coral masks and rigid proboscises form natural spears, waiting for prey to wander a little too close. Even the ground is deceptively hostile here as an unstable and constantly shifting ecosystem. To avoid the dune carvers below me, I had to master the timing of striking these little glowing crust tree pearls to create a temporary platform. This biomatter briefly materializes out of coral only to crumble seconds later. Perhaps these nuts were permanently in bloom during the Karak's prime, but thanks to the Citadel, we'll never know. The coral led me to the edge of the biome where I encountered a lone being keeping watch. I believe this guardian to be the last surviving remnant of the ancient Karak order, looking out at the border of the desert, a sentry forever bound to defending a civilization that has been reduced to dust for generations. When it came to life, I was fighting an enemy that was clearly born from loyalty, but perhaps also from the refusal to accept that the world they once swore to protect is now broken. Eventually, my journey through this coral landscape ended at the base of a massive coral tower with a great conchfly guarding the entrance, unmistakably the same one that had fled when I defeated its mate on my way to the Citadel. It moved faster and more relentless than before, summoning swarms of conchflies that moved in perfect formation. They clearly had it out for me with a vengeance, so after a fierce fight, I took down the beast and the path into the coral tower opened before me. Inside, I found the corpse of Crust King Khan, surrounded by members of his order, a group of trained warriors that were somehow bested by the Citadel. I sat down and tried to imagine what that age might have looked like. The interior of the coral tower transforms from a dry coral tomb into the vibrant, beating heart of the ancient kingdom right before its fall. The challenge within is referred to as the Coral Gauntlet, a series of battles against Khan's greatest warriors. The creatures here aren't mindlessly hostile, but driven by the undying loyalty to their king and their not yet broken world. I fought the Karaka and the Yago, trained in the art of the blade as well as the Gore, a hard-shell charger relying on weight and strength to summon coral on command. The being that fascinated me the most was the Core Crust Karaka, an overgrown elder able to spawn burning bubbles from within its coral-cased shell. Their fusion with the crust growth seems intentional, but it doesn't look comfortable. Eventually, I found Crust King Khan himself, a tragic figure defined by his inability to serve his people. This final fight is about meeting a soul consumed by his own failure, a hardened warrior lord of a bygone era, able to command the coral crust to his bidding. I woke up from my daydream, and as I stepped out of the coral tower, a distant electrical hum drew my attention to a different part of the biome. And so I found a new, terrifying sub-area of the Karak as a maze of tunnels lined by coral that isn't quite dead, but electrified. Some of Pharloom's biomes seem to be infused with elemental powers, much like the flintstone that can be found in the deep docks. This place, the Vault Nest, seems to be a natural source of electricity. The being that lives here, known as the Vault Worm, is able to synthesize and protect this electrical energy, suggesting that the natural life in Pharloom has evolved to either wield or survive these elemental forces. So this is like a living custodian of the electricity in this region. The difficulty of moving through the sands of Karak, the constant crumbling platforms and the oppressive heat all paint a grim picture. This ecosystem is one that has been permanently rewritten by the loss of its ancient protectors and the subsequent abandonment by the new powers above. The Citadel's rule over Pharloom is defined by this neglect, because once a place is conquered, it's simply left to rot. And the sands aren't the only place where this is true. Whispers speak of a once lush kingdom, ruled by a green prince and his partner, though of course, unsurprisingly, it too fell victim to the Citadel. But I'm determined to find what's left of this realm that has been compared to the greenery of the Shellwood region. By deciphering tablets, I found out the Green Prince's partner gave his life to save the kingdom known as Verdania, offering his body and soul to be used as the foundation for the Cogwork dancers. We've seen the Citadel accept the offering and mechanize the life force, only to destroy Verdania anyway. I search for the remnants everywhere, but it seems all that's truly left of this mysterious paradise is ruin and death. So once again, I sat down and tried to imagine what that age might have looked like. My mind filled with the image of a kingdom grown from the earth. Verdania was a place of overflowing, almost impossible life. I imagined myself inside a massive living cavern system where the ceiling was a lush canopy that filtered into soft greens below. The architecture was not built over nature, but with it, walls and pathways were eternally cloaked in a thick moss and climbing vines, giving the stone a gorgeous emerald hue. It was a place that smelled of damp earth and exotic flowers whose petals provided natural illumination and pathways in the cave. Life thrived everywhere, and the life forms were easy for me to classify. First up, the warrior class are bugs that reflect the kingdom's history of conflict and its people's inherent fighting skill, like the Verdania, a darting warrior with sharpened forelimbs and heightened senses. This other being, called an Escallion, is a blindingly fast warrior able to launch pointed pinions from its forelimbs as aerial defense. And the Kindanir is a child of Verdania, fully capable of fighting despite its young age. The next class is filled with flora creatures, showcasing a close relationship between Verdania's native life and aggressive plants. The Cloverstack is the ultimate example of Verdania's connection to nature. Its hide closely mimics the flora of its natural kingdom. The Leaf Roller is a pointed scurrier posing as plant life, using the abundant foliage for defense and survival. This class shows that the flora itself was hostile and active in a wild environment that was independent of the Citadel's influence. And the final class is the Water Dwellers. These insects are closely tied to water and suggest that Verdania was once a realm defined by clear, abundant water, which is an interesting observation considering it's located directly below Bilewater. The Pendra, for instance, is a flighty insect that lives beside still waters, a passive critter that really embodied the tranquility of the area before its destruction. Its larger kind, the Pendragger, is a heavy insect with a simple motion that is rather pleasant to observe. And the Leaf Glider is a flyer that survives in flocks with a body so light they can rest atop the still water surface. These delicate oddities emphasize the elegance and beauty of Verdania's ecosystem, contrasting rather sharply with the way some of its inhabitants were lost to the Cogwork Core. There's one more creature that closely resembles the flora of its territory, called the Pale Stag, a majestic deer-like creature with green clover-like growths on its body. This being is one with the surrounding biome, and its existence is tied to the natural balance of Verdania. Perhaps the fact it perfectly mimics the Clover Caves means it's an ancient part of the ecosystem, and the reason other bugs were able to make their homes here. Because there are signs everywhere of a thriving society that was one with nature, a haunting beauty that no longer exists. As I woke up from my daydream, I felt an urge to return to the Shellwood, just to be surrounded by nature and to feel what it might have been like to be part of the Verdanian ecosystem. What started as a relaxing walk through the park turned into something different when I turned left at the crossroads. The petrified vines were back once again, but this time it looks like someone built a home out of the eldritch material. I wanted to turn back, but something pulled me closer, and that's when I found the Grey Root Witch. She seemed interested in the nameless being I found earlier, so I handed it over to her, and then I had no idea how much time passed when I finally woke up. I broke free from the petrified vines and I felt different. No time to find a doctor. I need to get to the top of this world. On my way to the next zone, I had to pass through Bilewater once more, a biome built entirely on decay, where life clings to the refuse of something greater. But waste like that doesn't appear on its own. Somehow it's made, and somehow it gets dumped somewhere. That's exactly how I ended up at one of the biggest sources of the kingdom's pollution, the Citadel's greatest environmental sin made manifest. The Putrified Ducts are built from massive Roman-style stone structures, the same architecture that is historically associated with the transport of clean water into major cities. But this current state shows that the kingdom that provided clean water to its people fell into corruption and repurposed its life support into a waste disposal system. Saturated with the Citadel smog and excess, this area started to fester. The poison choked Bilewater and its inhabitants because it cannot absorb its own waste. It had to be forced out. It's used for the insane quantity of bodies experimented upon in the Whiteward, the power drawn in the Cogwork Core, and the massive consumption of silk required to maintain the elite's immortality. The life here doesn't look natural to me, but more like an ugly adaptation to man-made poison. Just like Bilewater, this place hosts an ecosystem built on the pollution of the Citadel. The spit squid, for example, subsists on the sickly water in this fetid environment to spit out its most toxic elements. Just like the swamp squid, they use their belly full of bile as an effective hunting tool. I was looking for more species to document and had a feeling I was getting close to this disgusting toothy growth that lives on cave roofs is hiding its tongue amongst fronds that look similar to catch prey, and it's clear they'll literally eat anything that touches their tongue. Barnags are awful, and worst of all, to reach certain areas I was forced to let them grab me and take me higher. This way, I eventually found the duct sucker, which is not only one of the funniest names I've ever heard, but also a surprisingly fitting one because this being only survives on the thick slime that coats its caves. It's this reliance on filth that means they are biologically enslaved to the Citadel's waste cycle. But not all creatures have adapted in a way that means guaranteed survival with a diet of slime and muck. I found this creature that calls herself the Huntress and her eggs in the southwest waters of the Ducts, and she had but one simple request: find 15 seared organs, 35 shredded organs, and 10 skewered organs. That way she can stockpile meat to feed the room full of eggs before they hatch. I usually try to preserve the wildlife instead of killing it, so I just left to continue documenting the way the Citadel ruined this world, but that might have been a mistake. I returned later and all I found was the Huntress's child, and beside him, the corpse of his mother, completely eaten away. Her eggs hatched and she had to sacrifice herself to become their food. In this futile world, perhaps it was a necessary sacrifice to prevent her newborns from becoming part of the ecosystem beyond their home. As I made my way higher, I realized that it's biomes like this that are the true face of the elite. The proof is right here. The fact they are constantly excreting death onto the heads of the pilgrims and the poor. Things are bleak in this kingdom that's well past its prime. It's clear that every biome explored so far has been stripped of their former glory. So I could not believe my eyes when I found a kind of museum that tried to preserve some of Pharloom's history. Like where I am right now, I found an entire enclosure modeled after the Marrow, complete with the critters that should only exist in that biome. And right next to it, there's a reconstructed meadow that looks exactly like the Farfield, with an overgrown wildlife enclosure that could only have been inspired by Shellwood. Each environment is inhabited by the creatures that can be found in its corresponding area. So when I stepped into this green enclosure, I felt an even bigger wave of nostalgia. The same mossy ecosystem where this entire journey began, teeming with the little guys that once wandered freely at the bottom of Pharloom soil. But I would be lying if I said there wasn't something deeply unsettling about seeing them trapped behind the glass and feeding on the carefully arranged moss of an artificial habitat. This wasn't a natural ecosystem, but a reconstruction, a memory someone was trying to preserve. And it seems the manipulation of life isn't limited to the Whiteward either. In this place, the Memorium, they made attempts at genetic engineering and selective breeding. The massive moss grub is unnaturally overgrown, perhaps implying the rulers believed they could improve upon nature, and I have no doubt these poor creatures know they are far from their natural home. I even found the sands of Karak, where a coral hulk with a dense shell was bred to immense size. A bug that was born tiny and mild until the Citadel deformed it in futile hope it may sustain. Right next to it was the vault nest with a chamber full of bugs on display. These creatures aren't just wildlife, but actual inhabitants of the kingdom. I don't want to imagine what kind of cruel experiments must have been performed on them. I eventually tracked down those responsible guards known as Memorium, who had learned to weaponize the vault nest electricity. They threw charged vessels like bolas, each impact erupting into a violent burst of energy. I dealt with them quickly, but it was obvious they were always completely outmatched, desperately trying to control wildlife that was never meant to be contained. At the top of the Memorium, I found the biome that was meant to resemble Greymoor and its craws, but all the nests and cages on display were empty. Instead, what I found was a huge flea who was immediately consumed by anger when I freed it from its cage. Luckily, it saw sense before I had to strike a killing blow to such a large and marvelous being. I was sure I had visited every ecosystem on display in the Memorium, but on my way to the exit, I found dead Citadel guards near broken glass. I stepped inside and found an empty display that looked to resemble Verdania. Empty, except for the dead leaf rollers. The next room had a pond and a single surviving Pendra flying around, but it's clear that the disciples that were charged with maintaining this place had a hopeless task from the start. Pharloom's wild lands, like any ecosystem, are not fit to be replicated within such an artificial space. The journey from the fake history of the Memorium to the true heart of the Citadel forced me into the service passages of the kingdom. The cramped, suffocating veins of this place, filled with stagnant air and steam vents. Navigating these air vents felt like crawling through the kingdom's ugly history. The walls are slick with moisture and dust, and the only illumination comes from stray slivers of light filtering through. Movement is constantly obstructed by narrow shafts, spinning fans, and blind drops. It was here that I encountered the drape mite, small territorial bugs that live and breed in dark places like this that seem almost built for them. The endless corners and cracks are perfect for mites to burrow and nest. The drapefly similarly looks like fabric somehow sprung to life, with its pelt perfectly matched to the rags it infests. But greed will always see some bugs swell above their kin, like the Drape Lord, a critter that's grown large from age and consumption. Its heavy body allows it to hit much harder than its younger companions. Few creatures of this silk-stricken place can find nourishment to grow this large, so it's rare to find full-sized mites at all in the Holy Citadel. It took a while, but eventually I emerged from these suffocating vents and into the next area, which felt like a physical expulsion from the Citadel's mechanical bowels, finally arriving at a space dedicated entirely to its true, terrible song. The stones of the Citadel seem to exhale music as the choir bugs perform their eternal task. Voices sing in a way that transforms the grand halls into a living instrument of praise. Sunlight filters through stained glass and casts long, honey-colored shadows across the grand promenades. There is silk everywhere, the life juice of this vertical world. It hangs in the banners that catch the updraft, like the fins of a majestic deep-sea creature. Swirling constellations of lumaflies bathe the grand halls in a rhythmic, living glow, illuminating an architecture so ethereal and soaring that the entire reach of the Citadel takes on a divine, celestial grace. The Choral Chambers represent the pinnacle of the Citadel's visible opulence, to confirm we have, indeed, reached the world of the elite. And it's exactly because I barely made it through places like Sinner's Road and the Underworks that this place is strangely hypnotizing. Like the entirety of the false journey to get here was worth it. As I moved through the halls, I saw the choir bugs leading groups of pilgrims through the biome. They are the same bugs I fought, spoke to, or saw struggling in the biomes below. All the desperate travelers, the wary pilgrims, but now that they've made it here, they are uniformly dressed in the Citadel's gilded attire. Guarding them are the Reed and Turister, tasked with maintaining order by force if necessary. They are fast, armed with sharp pins, and their use of silk shows skill far beyond standard bugs. The Grand Reed is an elite version, trained and fed beyond its fellows. But it was the Claw Maiden that disturbed me the most. A puppet servant suspended on strings of silk that require extensive amounts of it to maintain their service. Whenever I left even the smallest opening, they would literally steal the silk straight from Hornet's shell. No matter how carefully I moved, the Claw Maidens always found me and tried to take whatever resources I had left. The only refuge I discovered was this place called Songclave. It looks like a hidden sanctuary where wary travelers gathered. It wasn't just me seeking shelter. Other pilgrims I'd met along the way had found their way here too. Together, they built something rare in Pharloom, a quiet resistance, a small group that refused to sing the Citadel song. As much as I wanted to stay here, I also felt compelled to continue my journey and find out what other secrets the Choral Chambers were hiding. I found a spa right around the corner, with what's probably my favorite pilgrim of them all splashing around in it. A giant dining hall beautifully decorated with tables, chairs, and whatever this hungry thing is. A bellway to travel from one corner of the Citadel to the next, and I even found this sign leading me to a stage. The master of the stage, known as Trabio, is a fame-hungry thespian that roams Pharloom for new audiences. It's a battle, but even more than that, it's a theatrical spectacle with explosions, fireworks, and dramatic spotlights. His moves are showy and over the top, which, honestly, I simply don't have time for. I just hope this defeat doesn't send him into some kind of depression. That would be bad. To my surprise, there's an area that remains perfectly pristine, a place built to shield its inhabitants from the very rot they created. The High Halls is where the elite of the elite live out their lives, full of gold-ranked disciples of the choir and direct servants to the higher beings. Even so, the lethality of beings like the minister was unexpected. Their bodies may not have been built for combat, but their nature has been altered dramatically by the haunting. Even so, the High Halls are a visual lie. The marble is unblemished, the silks are perpetually clean, and every surface is gilded with gold. This is the aesthetic of true divine right, utterly devoid of the industry, sewage, or experimentation that defines every level below. It's a place that shows that the Citadel's wealth and power are entirely dedicated to preserving the perfection of its rulers. They literally dedicate their entire system to maintaining this pristine bubble of self-deception. It's a truth that annoyed me, but not one that made me angry. No, what made me angry was the Forum. An insane battle with 11 waves of enemies. This is where I first encountered the Maestro, a choir commander of the High Halls that's able to summon and command cogflies with a flick of their baton. It seems that they once summoned song from their subjects, but now they rise only to command an end to those unstrung. After the final wave, where I had to take care of not one, but 2 choir clappers, I continued to explore the High Halls and found this room where I was able to push a cart to reach a hidden area. The chamber was crawling with claw maidens, but it didn't take me long to realize why. This is their silk nest, the source that animates them. The moment I severed the silk threads feeding the nest, every last claw maiden instantly became inactive. They were gone for good, and the Citadel felt just a little less oppressive. So I got a little lost when I tried to find the next sub-area, and I came across this ominous statue called Pious Isomor. It seems this statue was made for the purpose of indoctrinating the pilgrims that arrived at the Citadel for them to join the ranks of the choir. And this decaying artifact of a time before the kingdom's collapse is our introduction to the Whispering Vaults, an expanse that serves as a library. It's cold and dimly lit, filled with towering shelves and archives of forbidden knowledge. The creatures that inhabit this space are a frightening intellectual group dedicated to preserving and controlling these scrolls. The scroll reader is the elite servant here, gilded but born only to recite inscrutable scrolls of prayer. It makes me think that maybe the Citadel's history isn't meant to be understood or believed, but just to forever be performed to justify their station. For some reason, these beings led me to this dusty room with music stands. I found this switch on the other side. I have made a terrible mistake, because apparently the switch unleashed these bugs that now infest the greater vaults. They are extremely annoying, and I have only myself to blame. These Vaultborn are young acolytes that aid the scroll reader as beings bred and raised in total darkness. They are the future generation of administrators, taught in complete isolation. To navigate this dark maze of stacks and scrolls, the lamp bearer is tasked with navigating these dim recesses to retrieve old scrolls, or perhaps they only illuminate the prescribed path to ensure that the truly dangerous secrets remain buried in the darkness between the shelves. A role that looks like it belongs to the Vault Keepers, but their true calling is to root out and condemn those not seen as sufficiently committed to the Citadel. Most of the Guardians I encountered lay dead, including a massive Vault Keeper that once must have played a crucial role in maintaining the vaults. But I found this other keeper called Cardinius who was actually able to talk to me. A large, long-bodied bug with multiple limbs that stretched across the room. No fool, this keeper. It has lived long, watched its fellows wither, but it shall not die. Not while knowledge needs be sought. I spent weeks, months documenting Pharloom. I talked to its inhabitants, unraveled its deep lore, and journeyed through its treacherous lands. And one thing has become very clear to me. Pharloom has a cultural sickness. High above, there is a society that catalogs its dead instead of mourning them. It seals their mistakes instead of reckoning with them. It preserves symbols after losing their meaning. In Pharloom, nothing is allowed to end, and so everything lingers long enough to become hollow. Our long journey has earned us our audience with the divine. At the top of this world, in the Cradle, the god of this realm dreams. This is the literal summit of Pharloom, but there is no open sky, only a suffocating canopy of white. Scattered around the base of this loom are abandoned harps that were originally used to keep the deity asleep and dreaming. And most disturbingly, there are cages everywhere, the same ones that transported Hornet to this kingdom. Underneath are strands of silk that seem to be pulled out of the giant cocoon at the top. The inhabitants of this world have created a giant loom around it to extract the powerful silk from their sleeping monarch. The Citadel symbol, the cocoon inside the crook, isn't a sign of worship, it's a diagram of a cage. The kingdom's survival depends entirely on the god's silence. They've spent centuries ensuring she never wakes because they realize that her true nature is a terror they aren't prepared to face. The pilgrims view this place as a holy land of shining light where their service to the song commences, but in reality, this is a mechanical cage designed to exploit a higher being for her silk. But Wait, something feels off. I can't explain it, but I feel an urge to fight the god known as Grandmother Silk. I need to wake up the heart of the haunting. Her threats stretch throughout the land, snaring its bugs and driving them to madness. I will put an end to it. It's the only thing left to do. Our journey has reached its end. In the final moment of our battle, the nameless being erupted and siphoned the combined pale power of Hornet and Grandmother Silk. From their essence, a new eldritch higher being has been born. Pharloom stops breathing as a silk-based kingdom and begins to transform into a petrified wooden graveyard. But is this truly the end? Rumors persist of a realm far above the Cradle and another hidden beneath Pharloom's deepest biomes. And what of the whispers that speak of an unexplored sea of sorrow? I have a feeling Hornet will have to return to complete some unfinished business. So as always, thank you for watching. This was by far the most difficult video to make, and I truly hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for all the continued support. Don't forget to subscribe because we're so close to 100k subs, and I'll see you in the next video.